On August 3, 2023, Galaxy Spin at Fun Spot Kissimmee was operating normally. Around 3 p.m., 3 riders were riding the ride together. All were children, with one being just 6 years old. The group was riding the ride for the 3rd time that day. They completed the first half of the ride as normal. As the coaster rounded the first turn on the 2nd level of the ride shortly after the car began spinning, the 6-year-old rider was ejected from the car, falling 20 feet to the ground and landing on one of the metal support beams. Bystanders rushed to the ride station and informed the ride operator, who emergency stopped the ride. The ejected rider was conscious when first responders reached them. The rider was taken to the hospital where they recovered. The investigation would be headed by the Florida Department of Agriculture and would seek to determine what caused the ejection. They would examine every aspect of the ride, including its operation, maintenance, and the riders themselves. The state first contacted Zamperla, the Italian manufacturer of the ride, to determine if the ride was in mechanical compliance. Zamperla first looked at the ratcheting paws that secure each lap bar in the locked position. In 2014 at Mount Olympus, this exact same model of ride suffered a rider ejection when these paws were not properly maintained by Mount Olympus. Zamperla found that the paws on Galaxy Spin were functioning properly and were being maintained according to their specifications. They next cycled the ride with an accelerometer to determine if the ride was running too fast. The accelerometer testing determined that the ride was running according to Zamperla's specifications. Finally, Zamperla reviewed the restrictions on riders that Fun Spot had in place, including a rule that riders must be at least 48 inches tall to ride alone and at least 42 inches tall to ride with an adult. They reviewed these policies and found them to also be in compliance with their own recommendations. With Galaxy Spin cleared of any mechanical malfunction, the state's attention then turned to the ride's operation. At the time of the accident, they obtained all operating and training records from Fun Spot related to Galaxy Spin, much like the state had done for the Orlando Freefall accident a year prior. Unlike Orlando Freefall, the state found that all operating documents for the ride had been completed properly, and the operator training was up to date and thorough. About a year prior to this accident, Fun Spot Parks began using IROC, or International Ride Operator Certification, to train and audit their ride operators. IROC is somewhat of an industry standard for ride operator training and certification that has slowly become more and more used at parks over the last few years. For example, it's used at all Cedar Fair parks. This training was effective for Fun Spot, as it was revealed through video footage that the operator of Galaxy Spin checked the ejected rider's height. The operator then secured the rider into the train by pushing down, then pulling up on the lap bar. And finally, the footage showed the operator watching the 3 riders as they left the station, ensuring they were all properly seated. All of these practices being exactly in line with how Zamperla specified the ride should be operated. With these 2 factors examined and the answer still unclear as to why the rider was ejected, focus then shifted onto the rider themselves. As mentioned, the rider was 6 years old and was riding with their 2 cousins, who were older children. All children were over 48 inches tall, meaning they could ride the ride alone without an adult. After all 3 children left the view of the operator, something must have happened that caused the ejection. Interviews with other guests at the park shed more light on the situation, with one guest stating that they witnessed the ejected rider standing outside of the safety bar on the 2nd level of the ride. Once they noticed this, they ran over to the station to inform the operator. In the process of this, they state that they heard the rider fall. Another statement came from a Fun Spot admissions employee who talked with one of the riders who was riding with the ejected rider. They stated that the ejected rider was, quote, moving their legs around a lot during the ride, and that they watched the rider fall. It's important to understand that even with modern design and engineering, it's often possible for riders to escape restraints if they try hard enough. This is especially true for less intense rides. This is how larger riders are accommodated, as truly no restraint perfectly secures all riders. This is the same reason that larger and more intense rides usually have less accommodating restraints and higher height requirements. This is why parks implement policies on smaller, less intense rides that require adults to ride with small children who may be more prone to attempting to escape from their restraints. With this information uncovered, we can reconstruct an accurate retelling of the events that led up to this accident. On August 3, 2023, around 3:30 p.m., Galaxy Spin at Fun Spot Kissimmee was operating normally. 3 riders, all children but taller than 48 inches, boarded the ride, passing several signs that warned against standing up. The smallest of these riders was measured by the ride's operator and found to be just over 48 inches tall. The riders were loaded into a car on Galaxy Spin, and the operator checked their restraints by pushing and pulling on the lap bar. The car was dispatched from the station, and the operator watched as all 3 riders remained seated properly until they were out of their view. The ride completed the first half of the cycle normally. Sometime in the second half of the ride, around where the car began spinning, the smallest rider in the group moved in a way that allowed them to become free from under the lap bar restraint. As the ride navigated the first hairpin turn on the second level, the rider was ejected as they were standing outside of the lap bar and near the exit of the ride vehicle. They fell to the ground about 20 feet below, landing on a support beam at the bottom of the ride. The ride was emergency stopped by the operator after hearing about the ejection from other guests that ran up to the platform. First responders attended to the ejected rider, and the other riders were evacuated from the cars, stopped on the control points of the ride. With this investigation complete, Galaxy Spin has now reopened, with only 2 changes being made. First, Fun Spot added more signage around the ride warning riders not to stand up. Second, Fun Spot implemented a new policy where riders under 10 years old must now be accompanied by someone 14 or older. They were not required to do either of these by the state or by Zamperla, but chose to do so out of an abundance of caution. Some have claimed that this accident could have been prevented with the addition of seatbelts, like what is asserted in the New Texas Giant and Orlando Freefall accident. Those 2 accidents involved larger riders where the seatbelts would have acted as measuring devices to prevent larger riders from riding. This accident involved a smaller rider overcoming the restraints. In my opinion, a rider who can find a way under a lap bar can just as easily unbuckle a seatbelt, making seatbelts ineffective. The addition of seatbelts would also complicate operations and restrict the ride for larger riders who could otherwise ride safely. Fun Spot has really been making an effort to set themselves apart from their roadside neighbors like the Slingshot Group in recent years. This accident underscores that by showing that their operators are well trained and understand how to complete their jobs safely, following every procedure as trained. Fun Spot parks are now safer than ever, and tens of other Zamperla spinning wild mice operate around the world without issues. Let me know your thoughts on this accident in the comments, and thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.